I got a real serious question for you. Have you ever thought about the most dangerous moment in your executive career? And I'm not talking about the moment that they make you pack your stuff up and they walk you out of the room because you're being terminated. That is a dangerous moment. But there's something far more dangerous before that moment ever happens. And I'm talking about the moment that you lose influence. See, when you lose influence, I consider it to be the most dangerous moment of a person's career. It's when you go from being relevant to irrelevant. It means you move from a place of importance and impact in your organization to a place that you might as well just be a piece of furniture. Now, before we get ahead of ourselves, I will tell you, I've been at a lot of executive tables over my career. I've worked at the executive level for a very long time, and I can recount every single time someone in the room hits this dangerous moment. Like, I'll never forget sitting in the C-suite about 8 years ago when we started to have a strategic conversation about a high priority in the organization, a very high priority. And everybody starts to engage in a conversation about this high priority. And there was one leader who was highly touted, who we recruited to the organization because of their skills, experience, and their acumen. And at this particular meeting, on this particular day, when we started talking about a strategic challenge that we were having or a strategic opportunity that we were having, this leader in particular started talking about their stuff. Now, when I mean their stuff, it didn't matter what the conversation was about. The first way they walked into the room was to talk about how this strategic priority was going to impact them and their team. They literally would start the conversation with, well, this will impact my team in this way. They really thought they were adding value by letting the senior leadership team know like what this is going to mean for my team. Now, I do know your team is important. I do know that your team matters. I do know that your team is probably overworked and overburdened. So it's only natural for you want to come in the room and start talking about how something is going to impact your team. But here's what I want you to know. Walking into the room to talk about how something is going to impact your team is the first step of ending your career as an influential executive. The very first step. That's how you start to lose influence very slowly, because you come to the executive table, into the room to talk about your team. See, you still have the title, Chief X, Y, and Z Officer, whatever your title is. You still have the compensation. Your salary has not changed. You've not lost your money. Your performance reviews are still good because your team is performing, that you're hitting all of your key performance indicators. You're hitting all of your quarterly goals, your semi-annual goals, and your annual goals. You got the title, you definitely got the paycheck, and you got the performance reviews. So you think you're doing good. But I'm telling you right now, you have lost your influence at the executive table. And it's a place in your career that is very hard to come back from. See, here's what I want you to understand, that influence fades long before your authority will fade. You're going to keep the title. You're going to keep your office. Your P&L is going to stay the same size. Your FTE count is going to stay the same. All of those things are not going to diminish at all. But I can tell you, you will be in the room, but you won't be in the conversation. This is how you will know that it's already shifted for you. And you've heard these things before. I'm certain you heard about the meeting that happens before the meeting, or even the meeting that happens after the meeting. And here's the main point. You were not in either one of those meetings, not the before meeting and not the after meeting. If you're not invited to the meeting before the meeting, or if you're not even talked about or thought about for the meeting after the meeting, and when you're in the main meeting, you say something and people move right past what you say, you have passed the Rubicon of no return, that you have lost your influence as an executive leader. This is the most dangerous day of your career. See, because here's what I know. I'm not talking to you from anything that's academic or in a book. I'm talking to you from 25 years experience at a leadership level. Here's what I know. I know that influence fades before your authority. And it fades because you have become a reliable leader. I know it sounds like an oxymoron. I'm supposed to be reliable, Anton. Let me give you the context of what I mean reliable. You're reliable to come to the executive table to talk about your stuff, to brag about your stuff, to say what your team has accomplished, to say what your team's problems are, to say how you're handling your team's problems. That you come to the executive table in an operational mindset. Like I literally just had this conversation yesterday, actually 2 days ago, with an executive. This executive is in a leadership position. This executive has been an executor his entire career, getting stuff done, knocking it out the park. KPIs are flawless. Performance reviews are flawless. Goals are hit. Comp is always received. Bonuses are always received. They're doing everything they're supposed to do. They're reliable. And I want you to know that reliable leaders are most at risk from becoming irrelevant at the executive table because you're seen as a doer, not as a thinker. You're seen as a person that doesn't have a PhD or DBA. You have a GSD. You know what a GSD is? You get stuff done. So after all of the strategic thinking is done, and we figured out the direction we want to go in and how we want to execute on the challenge, they're going to call you to do it because you're reliable. But what you're not is influential because you come to the table with a mindset focused on your stuff, on your team. I'm certain that you've probably heard of the book, 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. If you haven't seen it or heard it, it is written by Patrick Lencioni. It's a great leadership book. Matter of fact, every team that I work with, I recommend it as a pre-read before we have any kind of conversation. Because I want you to identify very quickly that when you bring an executive team together, all of them think that they're on a different team. They think they're on the marketing team because they oversee marketing. They think they're on the operations team because they oversee operations. They think that they're on the HR team because they oversee HR. And they think that they're on the finance team because they oversee finance. The last big one is IT. That your chief technology officer thinks that he's on the IT team because he oversees IT or she oversees IT. Here's what I want you to know. That's not the first team. See, when you come into the room, focus on the team that reports up to you, you're not coming into the room as an enterprise leader. See, one of the things I can tell you is that all of my years of being at the executive table, when I was at that table, here's what I understood. That number one, the peers that we're sitting around the table with, that's my team. Not the people who reported up to me. I remember one time I had about 28 FTEs that reported up to me, a couple different departments. And so you would think that I would be focused on the people who report up to me. No, I was focused on that senior leadership team. See, I knew that my job at that executive table was to not just be reliable for executing for those 28 people who report up to me, but my job was to be a strategic thinker and thought partner for those other areas. So even though I wasn't in finance, my job was to understand what's going on in finance. My job was to understand what's going on in operations. My job was to understand what's going on in human capital or HR. My job was to understand what was going on in quality and safety. My influence at the executive table was because I had the responsibility to be nose in and fingers out on every other department. That's what a senior leader does. That's what a senior executive does. So when the conversation starts to happen about what's going on at work, when the conversation starts to happen around the challenges you're having, the question I'm going to ask you is that when you speak, are you like E.F. Hutton? Now, I know I'm about to age myself when I say this, but you need to be like E.F. Hutton at the executive table. That when you speak, does everybody want to listen? Or do they move on when you speak? See, the question I'm asking you is like, if you say something at the executive team level, do people pause and think about what you say? Does it shift the conversation? Does it move the conversation into a different direction, or at least allow people to ponder what you said? Or when you start talking about your team and how something is going to affect your team, that the conversation just keeps right going like you never said anything. It happens far too often. So here are the three problems that you have. Again, I'm going to lay it out very clearly. Number one, your influence has started to fade long before your authority did. You got the title, but your influence is fading. Number two, you've become a reliable leader to not only talk about what's going on in your work area, but you are known as a person to go and do it rather than the person to design the strategy. Because at the meeting before the meeting, they designed the strategy. In the main meeting, they briefed everybody on the strategy. And then in the meeting after meeting, they decide, let's get Mikey to do it. Mikey does everything. That's what's happening to you because you're reliable. And the third challenge you have is that the room doesn't stop. They don't pause when you speak. They just keep right on rolling through. These are the challenges that I see so many executive leaders have, is that you have passed the Rubicon of having a great career, and now you're at the moment of irrelevancy. And let me warn you something very clear. When this happens, nobody's going to tell you. You're not going to get written up. You're not going to feel like, you're going to be fired, or that they're getting ready to walk you out of the door and pack you up and make you move on. HR is not going to call you and talk about a severance. None of that's going to happen. You're going to keep your title. You're going to keep your compensation. Your performance is still going to be high, but you have become invisible at the executive table. Period. Now that I laid that out, I want to give you three things that you should do and that you should think about to make sure that this never happens to you. I really tried to save this one leader who I saw on an executive team that I worked with, and this happened to him. I tried to explain it to him what was happening. He didn't want to listen. He was like, well, I still got the title. My bonus is still hitting my bank account. My team is still performing. And he did not understand that he was no longer in the conversation that he needed to be in. He was not there. So I want to help you make sure that you never get to that point, to make sure that you never have that challenge. So here's the first thing you need to think about, and the first thing that you need to do. You need to move from execution thinking to enterprise thinking. So when you oversee your team, you're always thinking about execution. How are we going to hit our KPIs? How are we going to hit our goals? How can I make sure my team's performance is sharp? How can I make sure there's no behavioral or discipline issues in my department? How can I make sure that my retention is high and my turnover is low? That's an execution mindset. But you need an enterprise mindset. An enterprise mindset is to fly 30,000 feet above your operations, above the division that reports to you, and that you see the whole chessboard. You see what's going on in the organization. You see the challenges that exist for the organization. You got to develop enterprise thinking. You can't develop enterprise thinking just staying focused on your team. You develop enterprise thinking by paying attention to what is strategically going to help or hurt your organization. And I'm going to give you a way to think about enterprise thinking. I'm going to give you something that you probably would significantly benefit from. And that's answering this question. What are the 3 biggest priorities for your CEO? Do you know what they are? What are the 3 biggest priorities for your chief operating officer? Do you know what they are? What are the 3 biggest priorities for your chief financial officer? You get where I'm going. You need to understand the 3 most important priorities for everyone on your senior leadership team. Every one of your peers, you need to know, what are they striving towards? What are they challenged with? What are they working towards? You need to understand them intimately. And then you might be saying to me, well, Anton, I don't have time to focus on their stuff. If you don't have time to focus on their stuff, then you don't have time to be an executive leader. You don't. And then you might be saying, well, Anton, they don't share those things with me. Well, if your colleagues at the executive table are not sharing their 3 biggest priorities with you, then that means you have a bigger problem than influence. You don't have the skills necessary to build the relationships that you need in order for you to be an enterprise leader. And if you want some help with either one of those things, I need you to put reset in the comment section. And if you don't want to put reset in the comment section, that's okay. Send me a direct message and type the word reset. Just send me a DM, type the word reset. Because you got to become move from an execution thinker to an enterprise level thinker. You got to be an enterprise level thinker. That's the first thing. The second thing that you need to do is you need to learn how to say the things that other people are avoiding saying. Like, I literally sent an email out to my email list this past week, and I asked them, I said, what's the one thing going on in your organization right now that everybody knows is happening, but for whatever reason, people are refusing to talk about? And I got some wild responses. One of the responses was that we really don't have any trust in this organization. Someone else responded back to me that not only do they not have a trust issue, but they have a senior leader that's leaving, and they see Game of Thrones is about to happen. It is about to be a fight for power inside of the organization. But nobody's talking about it. They just, attaboying and high-fiving his leader and patting his leader on the back because they're getting ready to retire or leave the organization. But nobody's talking about how the street corner conversation, or should I say the sweet corner conversation, is who's going to take over that person's portfolio, how we're going to reorganize that department. I had a third person tell me of how everybody can't stand the leader of IT. They feel like this person is worthless and doesn't add any value. Now, you don't necessarily need to say that that person is worthless at the executive table, but you do need to find a way to say the thing that everybody else is avoiding. That we have some strategic challenges in IT. That we're getting ready to have a power vacuum when Mary retires. That we have lost trust as an executive team. Those are the things that you need to learn how to say at the executive table. You got to say the things that other people won't say, because that's going to make people pause and think that you're thinking about the good of the organization, not about what's important to you. And I'm going to be clear. Don't say the stuff about your team, because that's what you're probably leaning towards. Well, that's the reason why I talk about my team, because they don't know what's going on with my team. Yeah, I understand that. But you can't come to the executive table with a me mindset and my team mindset. You got to come with an enterprise mindset and say the thing that's affecting the organization that nobody is saying. And you won't know that without knowing the priorities of other people, by understanding the situation of the organization. So you got to say the things that other people won't say. And here's the third thing as I get ready to close. You got to learn how to measure your influence and not your authority. Authority is around your ability to do stuff or make people do stuff. But you got to start measuring your influence, not your authority. So how do you measure your influence? You measure your influence about the number of your colleagues who call you before a meeting and says, hey, I want to get your thinking on something before we talk about it at the executive team. If nobody on your leadership team is reaching out to you to find out what you think before the conversation happens, if they don't want to pick your brain, like if you've never had someone, hey, I want to pick your brain about something, and what they want to pick your brain about is not about what your responsibilities are as a leader, but they want to pick your brain about something else, then you know you have some influence. But if they don't ever ask you for your advice, your counsel, your thoughts on what they could be doing better or what challenges they need to overcome, you got authority, but you don't have influence. And the reason why I'm sharing this today, because I've seen this far too often. At the executive table, you don't get removed very quickly or easily. See, when executive leaders get removed, it reverberates through the organization and maybe even through the industry. If you think about publicly traded corporations, when a chief executive leaves an organization, it's something that gets talked about in all of the industry publications because it's significant. So most company CEOs don't want to remove people at all because they know it becomes a disruption. But what they will do is they will just move around you. They'll leave you in a room like a piece of furniture. Everybody will walk around that old couch and never sit down on it. They'll walk around that table, never touch it. They'll start to walk around you like you don't even exist. So my final challenge to you is don't be that executive. You won't be removed. But you have to ask yourself this. When it comes to executive team meetings, and there's a question or a strategy put on the table, when you speak, do people pause or do they proceed? I want you to let me know. Type it in the comments. Just be honest if you can. When you speak, does the organization pause and ponder what you say? Or do they just proceed like you never said anything at all? That's my question for you today. Because I don't want you to hit the most dangerous moment in your career. I want you to move beyond it. I want you to be an influential executive, a very influential executive. And the only way you do that is to understand why execution thinking will get you killed, and you need enterprise thinking. You need to say the things that people won't say. And you got to start to measure your influence, not just your authority. So if this resonated with you, I want you to share this message with somebody that you know that might be struggling as an executive leader. Second thing I want you to do is I want you to let me know if there's something going on in your organization or in your industry that nobody is talking about. Drop it in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. And if you need help with this, my last thought for you is to send me a message, type the word reset, and I know exactly what you need and what we need to do. I want to thank you for watching. Everybody have a fantastic day.